Watch this.
Longest legislative session in state history? Absolutely. Weirdest ending to a session? Likely. We're wrapping up what can only be described as a wild wrap-up at the State House. Getting shots is never an easy time for kids or their parents, but these days it also carries with it a little extra weight of importance. So some hospitals are working to make getting a COVID vaccine a little less intimidating. Time is on your side, but what time? Well, it depends on what side of the time zone delineation you happen to be standing. And in Idaho, that could be 2 zones at once. It is over, and for real this time. For the first time in a long time, Idaho lawmakers woke up today without being under an active legislative session. They will be back in January, though, to kick off the next session. But for now, they are finished after closing the long book on this year's session about 24 hours ago. Now, being the longest session, wrapped around the longest recess, lawmakers have had some time to kind of assess the last 3 days and really the whole year. Joe Paris spoke with Republican and Democratic leaders at the State House for their final thoughts on a wild week, and boy, what a wild year.
The House is adjourned, sine die.
After 311 days, business is now officially closed at the Idaho State House for the year.
There was some relief there. This has been long and hard and frankly divisive at times. And so, but you notice we still had 24 people that didn't vote to end it. So that spells to, that points to taking these issues up next session.
House Speaker Republican Scott Bedke says after 3 days of work, the result is disappointing for lawmakers that were hoping to see legislation passed to take on the Biden administration vaccine mandates.
And I guess we fought to a draw. We came a few votes short in the Senate of moving the legislation out of the Senate. But I think this is what we should learn from this is that this is still a bicameral system. And it's going to take the House with the Senate and the Senate with the House in order to move stuff across the finish line.
The Idaho House passed legislation this week, but that legislation failed to pass the Senate for a variety of reasons. One commentary from lawmakers is that the Senate finally decided to simply call it a year after seeing dysfunctional legislation coming from the House process. Idaho Democrats at the State House say that's not necessarily a bad thing.
I'm pleased that none of the bills that were before us passed. I had a lot of concerns substantively and procedurally about how all of this went down.
House Minority Leader, Democrat Alana Rubel, says there are concerns about the perception of the House following this week. Many saw it as the wilder side of the State House, which isn't new, but is still a concern.
It did feel that way to some extent, which pains me because I'm a member of the House. I've dedicated 8 years of my life to this body, and I hate for us to be seen as not a serious legislative body. But I think there was some of that concern. And frankly, you saw it in that a lot of the key players, some of the hospitals and the Association of Commerce and Industry and, the big players in the business world didn't even bother showing up on the House side because I think they viewed the House as hopeless and that the only people that would listen to some of these more serious concerns were over in the Senate.
The last 3 days at the Idaho State House cost taxpayers about $100,000, which some lawmakers say is concerning, saying it was simply a waste for the end result of not passing any meaningful legislation. Money aside, though, lawmakers agree the process of listening to Idahoans on major topics was very important. Just ask Senate Minority Leader Michelle Stennett.
A good education for both sides. We got to hear from the people and take those thoughts into January. And they were able to learn that there are many things already, tools that they are able to use to defend themselves and to protect themselves that are already in statute. So we made some good successes, and I think that piece of it was very encouraging and a reason why it might have been a good idea to be here. You make the best out of the opportunity.
To be clear, Idaho Democrats were against coming back this week, believing topics could wait until January. This week is a good reminder for Idaho lawmakers about the importance of the process and topics heading into January.
We're not the same people. Our constituents aren't the same. Our regions aren't the same. Our economics aren't the same. And so that's where we have to be the voice for the people who elected us, and there will be differences. It's how we manage ourselves with those differences and stop the labeling and the attacking and actually get down to work and respect each other in the process.
With essentially no legislation passed this week, the stage is now set to take up COVID and vaccine issues early next year. Some lawmakers argue that not passing anything this week is okay. It's proof that the system works.
Everyone knows this on some level. Now, we get wrapped up in our own ideas and the strength of those ideas, according to us, but until we go through a vetting process, until they are peer-reviewed, and we want our system to work that way. If we're going to change laws, we want there to be a thorough vetting in both the House and the Senate, because our system moves slow on purpose. We don't change things easily. And when we do it when there is agreement. And if we don't have agreement, we shouldn't change it.
All right, Joe, I kind of heard this from a few legislators, and I kind of saw this as well. A different vibe this week than we've seen over the last couple of sessions. Safe to say, or too simple to say, decorum returned over these last 3 days.
I think that the idea that the State House is this serious, boring place has been a joke over the years, but there's a reason why it is perceived that way. It's because it had been for so long. But Brian, as we saw last summer with, a lot of community engagement, if you want to put it that way, things did get out of hand out inside the state capitol. And times during the session this year, things got out of hand as well. And there was a concern heading into this week that, again, there could be all kinds of sideshows that would distract from what's really going on at the State House. So to answer your question in a long form, it did feel like a very return to traditional State House this week, and it's something that lawmakers noted to me that they really appreciated from each other as well as members of the public. Whether they got their way or not this week, and there's always a few exceptions to this.
There was a few, yes.
Lawmakers said, with the exception of one or two people specifically, everyone was really respectful this week. There were tough conversations. There were serious conversations that become very emotional. But lawmakers gave me the impression, and what I saw, people were respectful of the process, and that's the point. The State House is supposed to be boring and mundane because we're making laws for our society to live under. It's not supposed to be this big entertainment sideshow that sometimes it has become here in Idaho and nationally as well. And Brian, you could say it's the sign of the times, but in terms of no news is good news, in terms of the decorum, yeah, lawmakers will agree with that.
Let's hope that continues into January's session 2022. And again, as you said, these things aren't swept away. We're going to see these issues come back up in about 7 or 8 weeks.
Oh, yeah, and I'm sure that the chatter about it all,
yep.
In December, we'll start to hear about it a lot.
All right, thank you very much, Joe. Now, on that vein as well, a big part of why this legislative section, or extension, I should say, was called together was because of what President Biden tried to do earlier this month. You may remember, on November 4th, the Biden administration tried to implement a new emergency standard for American businesses, those with at least 100 employees, that is. The Department of Labor and Occupational Safety and Health Administration would require those businesses to make sure their workers were fully vaccinated, or at least tested weekly for COVID-19. It was a rule that was supposed to go into effect by January 4th. Now, lawsuits were filed, the judge pushed pause on the order, and then just this week, OSHA flat out suspended its enforcement of that rule. But it's not completely dead. It is still headed to a circuit court in Ohio, and it could even go to the Supreme Court. See shadow docket. However, if we've learned anything during this past year and a half, nothing ever just goes away, but it can mutate. And new variants of either the OSHA vaccine requirement or Idaho lawmakers' attempts to make them illegal could still evolve, which is why we asked University of Idaho constitutional law professor Dr. Shakira Sanders about it.
We haven't had a court dig into the nuts and bolts. And until we do, we don't know yet if the mandate will actually take effect.
Right. So it's not finished from the OSHA standpoint, and it's not finished from the Idaho standpoint either, because they could take it all up again next session.
Exactly. And I do keep that in mind. We will be in session once again in a few short months. So it very well could be that this downtime is good time for our legislature members to start to have conversations about coming to an agreement so that we don't see so much back and forth and so much tension, given the importance, whether one wants to vaccinate or not, whether one wants to wear a mask or not. This pandemic has proven to be quite deadly for quite a few people. And that's a serious matter. And we want our legislative members to be thinking deliberately about this, rationally about this. So hopefully the downtime will give them some time to figure out where they actually do agree on some issues.
And without so much tension, as she said, that would be a Christmas miracle. Dr. Sanders pointed out current OSHA rules have already been established as constitutional, since it is part of federal government's power to ensure the health and safety of the workplace. And should any version of a vaccine requirement go forward, it would become an issue of preemption, meaning when federal law conflicts with local law, the federal law shall prevail, supreme law of the land. Point is, we already know what's going to be an early session issue come January. Going to the doctor to get a shot can be a pretty scary thing for a lot of kids. So some hospitals and other health clinics are trying something a bit different, at least for the young ones getting the COVID vaccine. We're going to get to that in just a minute, but first, let's talk about this. Your questions, your comments, and even your complaints. We want to hear all about it. Well, maybe not the complaints, but whatever it is, make sure you send it to us. 208-321-5614. We're going to be sharing some of these text messages at the end of the show, so make sure you include the hashtag the 208 and your name. Usually getting your kids vaccinated is just a given. From the moment you take them home from the hospital, they're set up on a schedule to get their shots, from the first few months to just years down the road. These days, vaccinations may have taken up some time during dinner table discussions, something we probably didn't do a whole lot of before. Should we or shouldn't we? Well, about 3 weeks after the Pfizer vaccine was approved for kids aged 5 to 11, the parents of more than 10,000 kids in that age group in Idaho, they decided they should. At least that first dose of the vaccine. Well, no matter the vaccine, there's usually some crying involved, and it's not just from us parents. So how are clinics making the experience a little less intimidating? Here's Katya Stepovic.
Last Saturday, St. Luke's Children's Hospital held a clinic to vaccinate kids aged 5 to 11. On that single day, 722 children were vaccinated. BSU vaccinated over 200.
Parents have been so just appreciative, not only of having the vaccine available for their children, but also these extra pediatric supports to make the experience really positive for them.
We know that some parents have been eager to get their kids vaccinated, but what about the kids themselves?
We knew with this age group we would have to do some special things to get the kids comfortable in this environment, knowing there'd be a lot of anxiety for them coming in.
Knowing the kids will need to come back for a second dose, 3 weeks later, St. Luke's and Boise State went above and beyond to make the experience an enjoyable one. The kids were able to interact with pet therapy dogs, stuffed animals, have music therapy, and were given sweets as a distraction.
We have this vibrating ladybug that we'll put on their arm, and so they'll feel the vibration of that, but not the injection going in. Candy, anything we can do to bribe kids to come in and get that vaccine.
And so far,
it didn't hurt that bad.
It hurt a little bit.
The kids I spoke with aren't hating it.
It was like a quick poke. It kind of felt like a flu shot to me, because and it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, honestly.
I was feeling nervous, but also excited because after I had the vaccine, I was like helping fight COVID, and I would also be protecting myself.
Felt just like a flu shot. In fact, I didn't even feel it at all. It was great to be able to get my vaccine because I've been looking forward to this for a while now.
It's been such a positive experience the way we're doing things. We've actually had kids look us in the eye and say, I can't wait to come back.
I was actually excited because, quarantine has been stressful, and I feel like I'm safer when I get the vaccine.
And it sounds like parents, well, they're pleased too.
A lot of parents feel their kids are going to school not being protected. So at least we're giving them peace of mind of protecting them.
The energy on Saturday was really positive, and we're looking forward to that again this Saturday. And I think the kids are eager to come back.
I'm excited to be fully vaccinated.
I was really glad that I could contribute to ending COVID because I really hate COVID.
Yeah, don't we all? Now, if you're interested in these perks in particular for St. Luke's, sign up now because they won't be around much longer. But for BSU, they will have clinics Monday through Friday. Brian, all I have to say is us adults, we're getting gypped. I want a therapy dog there the next shot I get. Come on.
No kidding. At least throw in a lollipop or something. Give me some candy.
Yep.
Something. Exactly. All right. Thank you very much, Katya. Six score and 18 years ago, someone finally decided to pull the plug and make time zones a thing. Nearly 7 scores later, how did Idaho go from 1 to 2 time zones? Is there some unknown piece of Idaho history that we should be looking to uncover? Text it to us. We're always looking for more Idaho-related stories. It's all about the 208. And the number, 208-321-5614. Don't forget your name and the hashtag the 208. You know, finding the perfect Christmas tree topper is a whole lot easier when you actually have a top to your Christmas tree. Yesterday, we shared the struggle of the Downtown Boise Association tree they set up in the center of the Boise Center on the Grove Plaza. It took on a Charlie Brown Christmas vibe after not one but two of the trees lost their lids. Well, they scrapped the first one, soon to be mulch for several city parks, but they stuck with the second one. 24 hours after sticking it in place, well, they stuck the top back on where it belongs. You're looking at a time lapse of the crews working today to get it back on in one piece. And look, it fits perfectly. As it was described to us by the Downtown Boise Association, yeah, the tree, she's pulled herself together nicely, something so many of us are having to do after a year like this. Crews are going to start decorating that tree all back in one piece tomorrow. And if it all holds, it will be lit the day after Thanksgiving. Time flies, time waits for no one. Lost time is never found again. Lots has been said about time over the years. And about 200 years ago, time was pretty relative. I mean, it still kind of is now, but back then it was in much smaller increments. Prior to 1883, the North American time zones we know today didn't exist, meaning time was all over the place. And it was on this day, at noon, that you could time travel in the state of Idaho. In the early 1880s, there were anywhere from 40 to more than 140 local times across North America, all of them dictated by the position of the sun. Straight overhead, well, that was high noon. Except high noon in Salt Lake City wasn't exactly the same as high noon in Boise. That solar time meant confusion for travelers, especially on the railroads. 56 standards of time are now employed by the various railroads of the country in preparing their schedules of running times, reported the front page of the New York Times on April 19, 1883. So in order to avoid the annoyances, later that year, the leaders of the locomotives got together for the General Railroad Time Convention in Chicago. Coordinating consistent time seems about as fun as it sounds, but they did leave that October 1883 meeting with an idea. Let's divide the country into 4 time zones: the Eastern, the Central, the Mountain, and the Pacific, each an hour apart from the one next door. That time standard would begin a little more than a month later, at noon on November 18, 1883. And for the first few decades, it looked like this, separated by already established norms, economics, and the landscape, like the Mountain Time Zone pretty much along the Rocky Mountains. Then Congress made time zones mandatory with the passage of the Standard Time Act of 1918, which put the Panhandle part of Idaho in the Pacific Time Zone, a separation that runs along the Salmon River just north of Riggins. Why there? Well, it has to do with commerce and the closest major economic area. For North Idaho, that would be the port of Lewiston and westward. For southern Idaho, Salt Lake City to the southeast, making Idaho one of 12 states split into 2 time zones. Okay, so you may have noticed on that time zone map, you might be wondering why that southeastern portion of Oregon is included in the Mountain Time Zone. Well, again, that has to do with location and commerce. The closest big city would be Boise, which happens to be in the Mountain Time Zone. You know, there was a 5th time zone included in the Calder Act, the Alaska time zone established with the Standard Time Act in 1918, and so was daylight saving time to save energy during World War I. Well, that part of the law was repealed a year later. A lot of people think it should be again, but after being reestablished with the Uniform Time Act of 1966, well, it would take the Secretary of Transportation and an act of Congress to change it. All right, just a reminder, you can connect with us, the 208, at all of these locations that you see on your screen. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and through email. All of the locations listed there as well. And don't forget, if you miss an episode of the 208, you can always catch it on YouTube. Full episodes are there, and well, I think you find pretty much all of them there. So check it out if you miss an episode live or either when you record it at home. All right. Let's get to your comments that you sent in during the show today. A lot of people commenting on the wrapping up of the legislative session for the 2021 session. Slow and boring, says Stacy, and thoroughly vetted describing this latest legislative session are phrases I couldn't be happier to hear. This is how proper governing should take place, and I, for one, welcome it back. Laws should never be passed by the loudest voice in the room. Our governing checks and balances in place look to have held this time. Let's hope it stays that way. And a lot of the legislators feel the same way. They did learn a lot these last 3 days, is what we were told. GOP leadership said system moves slow on purpose with thorough vetting and peer reviews on new laws, but didn't they also try to pass 30-plus bills in 3 days, asks Nick from Boise. There were about 29 of them, but only about a third of those made it out of the House, and even fewer, about 3 or 4 actually were considered by the Senate. So not nearly that many made it as far as you think. Brian, I noticed that none of the legislators felt bad about taking $90,000 to learn the lesson of poor legislating, says Ray. Meanwhile, $100,000 of taxpayer money didn't really get anything done except a letter written to the president, very uncalled for. I hope the voters are paying attention, says Bob. A lot of people are and are a little frustrated with that 3 days with nothing happening. But isn't no legislation better than bad legislation? Maybe. Brian, living in Weiser, we are further west than San Diego. We should be in the Pacific time zone, says Brian. That's a good point. I looked at the map. It's true, but it's going to take an act of Congress to change that as well. We'll see you back here tomorrow.